Yep. And hey Udo, maybe just mention that he wasn't able to come in person. Like,
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to World Quest. Hey, we got to do this again, okay? Welcome to World Quest. There we go. Before I get started, I would like to let everybody know that this presentation is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated to the Montana World Affairs Council by MCAT. Good morning, students from all corners of the state and lots of places in the middle of the state as well. A quick thank you to Chris Hislop, the Executive Director of the Montana World Affairs Council, and Nikki Geiser, the Program Director of the Montana World Affairs Council, for having organized and for hosting this incredible event again. Live and in person, when it comes to big education events, Chris and Nikki are the best. A round of applause. I think Nikki's right there. My name is Udo Fluke. I'm a German-born researcher, curriculum designer, instructor, podcaster, author, and founder of a local consulting company. I lived in Germany for the first 20 years of my life and have lived in Missoula for the last 3 decades. I came to Missoula in 1989 to study at the University of Montana. I hold 4 degrees from this institution, and since 2003, I have developed and been teaching undergraduate and graduate courses at the University of Montana in various schools and academic departments, as well as seminars across the UM campus and in the Missoula community. With an increasing demand for diversity training in 2016, I founded Intercultural and Global Competency Training and Consulting in Missoula. Since 2018, I have the honor to oversee Arts Missoula Global, a program that is anchored in Arts Missoula, the designated arts and culture agency of this city. While I encourage you to find out more about Arts Missoula Global by going to www.artsmissoula.org, please allow me to provide you with some background on Arts Missoula Global and its unique programming and services in the next few minutes. Arts Missoula Global has 4 branches, and in no particular order, those are the services for the Missoula Community Branch. Since 2018, I host the Worldview film series at the Roxy Theater, screening 4 international films every fall and spring. All screenings are free to the public. The cost for the film rental and the Roxy Theater itself are absorbed by the generous sponsorships of local businesses and organizations. Since February of 2020, I host International Voices with Udo Fluke, a monthly podcast series. The aim of the podcast series is educating and informing local audiences with guest speakers discussing current, upcoming, and established international programming, events, activities, and collaborations, pretty much about all things cultural and global. One big event is the annual German Fest at Caras Park. For the past 3 decades, it is one of the largest cultural festivities in Missoula. The next branch is the Services for Organizations and Employees branch, which basically offers cultural and global competence training for organizations and their employees in Missoula and surrounding area. The third branch is the Educational Service for Students and Teachers branch. So for the last 2 decades, I've developed seminars and semester-long courses that help learners build cultural and global competence. And after I've done this at the university, we thought in 2014, wouldn't it be a good idea to offer this to the local school system? And so in 2014, we started exactly that. Now we have 3 school districts included in this and 15 individual schools. And I teach about 200 seminars a year in those schools. The program gained international attention and interest through conferences in Canada and New Zealand in 2019, and the program is now the only program in the United States in regard to the breadth from elementary school to university level, as well as the unique pedagogical approach and content. The 4th branch maintains the Missoula sister city connections. So Missoula is twinned with Palmerston North, New Zealand since 1982 and Neckargemünd, Germany since 1992. So 1982 and 1992. That means that New Zealand's connection is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and our Neckargemünd connection is 30 years old. Through this sister city connection, all of you in this theater will be connected to your fellow high school students in Germany in just a little bit. Sister Cities International was created by President Eisenhower in 1956 at a White House conference on citizen diplomacy. As a member of the Sister City International Network, Missoula belongs to one of the oldest and largest networks of citizen diplomats in the world. Our objective is to cultivate friendship and understanding among different cultures and to celebrate and magnify the catalytic power of people-to-people interaction, one individual and one community at a time. Mutual understanding and respect between nations and their citizens are the overall goal of Sister Cities International. I'm very pleased that students from the Max Born High School in Neckargemünd will be joining us today for the student-to-student portion of this program. I'm always honored to collaborate with the Montana World Affairs Council on a local level, bringing students like you together, benefiting our ever-growing culturally diverse and international community in this city. Thank you for having me today. You're very kind, thank you. Next, I would like to introduce one of our distinguished guests this morning, Oliver Schramm, who unfortunately was not able to be with all of us in Missoula this morning due to weather and flight complications, but he will join us in a live stream in just a few minutes. Mr. Shum is German Consul General in San Francisco since August 2021. He was born in Hamburg and is half Italian. He is married with 3 teenage boys and trained as an economist. In 1991, he entered the German Foreign Service, the first crew of a newly unified East and West Germany. Other than serving in Bonn and Berlin, he also wrote speeches under then Chancellor Helmut Kohl. In the past 30 years, he has served in many locations around the world: Seoul, Washington, D.C., Rome, Lima, and most recently as Minister and Head of the Economics Department in London. Therefore, he's very familiar with all issues relating to Brexit. He lived extensively in the US, first as an exchange student in Memphis, Tennessee. In 2002, he obtained his MPA from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and then served as deputy press officer at the German embassy in Washington, D.C. He's familiar with the US West Coast from trips to Oregon, Seattle, and Hawaii. However, The San Francisco Bay Area is entirely new to him, and he is thrilled to explore the Golden State. Among his favorite pastimes are running, reading, meditation, and spending time with his children. Being half Italian and a bit of a foodie, he's eager to explore the culinary specialties of California as well as the great wines from Napa, Sonoma, and beyond. Please help me welcome German Consul General Oliver Shum, joining us from San Francisco.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Guten Morgen, liebe Studenten. Thank you, dear Udo, for the kind introduction. And of course, my wish to explore California, of course, extends to my whole district. And I would have loved to be with you this morning in Montana and beautiful Missoula, but it wasn't so much the weather, although it was pouring in Seattle, but it was just the technical issue. A plane just didn't work, and they couldn't come up with another one, a spare plane, and so the next flight would have been tonight to Missoula. So we had to return last night to San Francisco, to sunny California. I already promised, and I promised the Montana World Affairs Council that I will not relent until I manage to set foot on Montanan soil. First of all, let me thank you. Let me thank the Montana World Affairs Council, Chuck Leonard, and Chris Heislop, and Nikki Geis, and all the other helpful members of the team for bringing this event together. Very exciting. And I heard that Montana is really one of the driving forces in that competition, which is the Academic World Quest. And I commend you for the many years that you've been so busy and so successful also when it came to bring Montanians to the final quest in Washington, D.C. I would have loved to be with you this morning, but I will try to bring across some of Germany and Germany issues as best I can. Maybe let me start with just maybe some figures and some comparisons. I'm sure you've all studied Germany quite diligently, but just to give you a perspective, Germany is one of the major economies in the world. It's actually ranked number 4 when it comes to the gross domestic product. It would be followed by California, by the way, if California were to be a sovereign state, on number 5. Another interesting comparison I would make is with regard to the area that Montana and Germany are covering. And I found out that it's pretty much the same area, although Montana being a bit bigger and more extended than Germany is. In terms of population, of course, there's another difference. We are now, the unified Germany is now a country of 82 million. But I read that Montana is constantly growing, even the double digits. So there's some catching up on the way. I've also read with great interest that a great number of people in Montana have ancestry going back to Germany, around almost 30%. But the German spoken in Montana is on a bit of a lower scale. So hopefully with today and also the prizes that some of you take home or may win, and I would have loved to give out today, will also help to up the game and to lift the numbers of German speakers in Montana as well. Since this is the GeoQuest, I would also maybe start with taking a look at history and maybe some of the forces and elements and developments taking place these days, very important changes in political fields, and certainly all of that connected to Ukraine. Maybe looking way back over 100 years, one can say that other than many people might think, Germany is quite a young state. It certainly, as a nation state, much younger than the US is, which came to life in 1776. Germany only in 1870, after Prussia made an attempt to unify Germany successfully, waging two wars, but not, of course, joining the ranks of democratic free societies as they were at the time, when it comes to the first decades of its existence. Then we had World War I, and certainly then after a first experiment on German soil with the Weimar Republic, a first attempt to establish a democracy in Germany, which of course then, as everybody know, ended in the catastrophe of the Nazi regime and World War II and the Shoah. So in the end, 1945, Germany ended up being a separated country, split up into a Russian Soviet zone, and the three Western allies occupying the western part of Germany. West Germany founded in 1949. And I still remember, I was born in 1964, how that was to live in a divided country. I remember my first trip driving in a little Mexico Beetle to reach West Berlin, coming from Hamburg, and very, very impressive and very intimidating fortification lit up at nighttime, and you had guards pointing their guns at you, and you had to very slowly and stopped by the police of East Germany, and you gave out a sigh of relief once you entered upon Western territory in West Berlin. Today, when I drive with my kids, my teenage boys, to Berlin from Hamburg, you wouldn't even notice. There's just only a signpost at the side of the Autobahn, and there's some Burger King and McDonald's to feed the hungry drivers and truck drivers. So that is a big change that has come about, but it's something that I still do remember, how different life was at the time. Also, when you drove from West Berlin to East Berlin, you had certain stations with the subway, which were then closed off. So a very different mood, a very different situation at the time. And basically, Germany, the modern Germany that you know, the unified Germany, is a very young state. It was founded basically with the final legal acts in 1990. So we're only 32 years old, much younger than Montana, and definitely younger than the United States of America. And when I joined, Udo has just mentioned that in 1991, everything was still up and in turmoil, and certainly the 17 million East Germans had to adapt their life to a Western open democratic society and learn overnight to accept a new currency, different ways and regulations and different ways to go about life. And certainly the 65 million West Germans had also to rediscover what was part of their country, and that they had been separated for a long time. So thinking back of the big events and catastrophes I just really quickly, fleetingly mentioned, had repercussions, of course, on our post-unification politics. To accept a new currency. So that meant that German foreign policy always had to follow certain guidelines with regard to export of weapons, also with regard to our relations to Russia. So we always had to, and followed this guideline over the past decades, to kind of come to terms with the countries in the east of Europe, but especially also with a difficult and at times not always easy partner that is Russia. And there were certain guarantees given in the 90s. You've read about that the Ukraine had to give away their nuclear weapons, and NATO had to restrict from certain activities or deployments of troops. So this all has left its stamp also on German foreign policy. And it's no secret, you've all been following the news the past days. That has now changed dramatically with the brutal invasion of Ukraine. Germany has almost steered around or swerved its course of foreign policy 180 degrees in the past days. And now our Chancellor, our head of government, Olaf Scholz, has announced that we will deploy more troops, and we will also send weapons to a country which is not a NATO member, which was a restricted area previously, but now with that big challenge that has come about through this war of aggression and invasion, there's more to be won, or rather more to be lost, should we not stand united together with our partners in the European Union, together with our partners in the G7, closely coordinating. And maybe this is also one big surprise, that through this challenge and this brutal attack by Russia, the West stands very united, and Germany stands in solidarity with Ukraine. You might have seen the pictures. There's been mass demonstrations in German cities, 500,000 gathering on Sunday in Berlin alone to voice their solidarity with Ukraine. Happened in other cities in Germany as well, Cologne, Hamburg, Munich, everywhere. And we are stepping up to the plate and trying to support Ukraine best as we can. Still, we can't, of course, send troops and interfere in the fighting. But the packets of sanctions that have been agreed upon with our partners are the most stringent and the most comprehensive packages of sanctions that have ever been, I think, agreed upon in the group of Western countries. You might remember that with the annexation of the Crimea Peninsula in 2014, already there had been sanctions agreed upon, but there has always been a channel of diplomatic efforts, open the Minsk agreement, negotiated by our former Chancellor Angela Merkel, but also the Normandy format, bring together Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia in talks. But in the end, now Vladimir Putin has apparently said no to negotiations and to talk to the West. He just wants to do a power grab and a land grab, and we have to deal with it. And I think at the core of the issue is the Ukraine being a democratic country with a freely elected government. And I think that is something that we have to defend as Western democracies all over the world, but not only Western democracies, all democracies in the world. And as I said, Germany has closed the ranks. We have given up a foreign policy stance that has characterized German diplomacy and German foreign policy for my lifetime. And I must say, I would never have imagined to see a war again, apart, let's say, from the Yugoslav war in the 90s, but that was more of a civil war, a war of secession in Europe again. And I hope we can all together make sure that in the end, maybe through negotiations or giving a more robust stance to Ukraine, this war of aggression can come to an end. So this is a bit of a glance to what is going on these days. Other than that, Germany is a very close partner of the US. There's also a lot of partnering and partnerships connecting Montana with Germany. Udo has mentioned some of the sister city partnerships, and certainly also business-wise, there are a number of connections. For instance, in the field of the photonic industry, there's a big cluster located in Montana. We've just recently had a photonic fair going on in San Francisco with 50, 60 German companies, also part of them also in business connections with Montanan firms. So there's a lot that is already there, but there's more to be agreed upon and more to be to be realized, I think, in when it comes to our relationship. And I think today's event and academic world quest is another step bringing Montana and Germany closer together. And I also hope that the prizes that are being called out for the winners will also help in doing that. I will stop here, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions and to your curiosities, and also maybe listening in on what you and the fellow German students will have to say to each other. Thank you so much.
So it's time for Q&A, and today we have a microphone in the center for you to create a line at. Go for it, yes!
Hi, guten Tag. So both of my grandparents are first generation German immigrants. And I know that they kind of have a conflicted identity as I do as an American citizen, but they're very prideful people, but they're also conscious of sort of the dark parts of Germany's history, I guess. But my question is, how does Germany want to define itself in the world stage, in the 21st century?
Thank you. That's a great question. Part of it is maybe also lying in what I just mentioned regarding Ukraine. Germany is, I mentioned that Germany is the fourth largest economy in the world, and much of our wealth and our well-being and our income, if you want, depends on the possibility of keeping up free trade. Exporting, Germany is one of the main exporting countries. We have also many foreign direct investments in many different countries. There's, for instance, a number that I always found astonishing also in the years when President Trump tried to work with punishing tariffs to get his will or his political line and thinking through. I learned that the highest number of German cars produced and exported to China is coming from the US. So in a world which is a globalized world, intertwined world with companies that have more of an international stamp than rather a national stamp, that is something that is very important to Germany, that we have a rules. We live in a rules-based world, and not in a world where you have like influence spheres where the stronger one wrestles the weaker countries to the ground, and just sheer and brutal force is the decisive factor. I think after the Second World War, it was especially thanks to the wise US politics, to establish international organizations like the United Nations and others, and that followed subsequently, to make sure that an international order and rules-based system was in place. Certainly not applicable to all countries in the world, but to a large majority of democratic societies. So that is where Germany sees its future. We need to live in a world where, in a globalized world especially, where talking and negotiating and compromise and democratic rules and values prevail, and not a world where people are systematically shut out from democratic or political decision making, from also personal individual perspectives to create a better life and to pursue the life and the role they want to pursue. So this is something that we have certainly learned, and which has become like a new DNA of the first of West Germany and then the unified Germany. And in this we see a great synchronicity and similarity of values with our Western partners, especially with the United States of America.
Awesome. Dr. Shane.
Bitte schön.
Line on one side to look.
I got here. Okay.
Okay. So I know with the recent invasion of Ukraine, Germany has been less on board with some of the restrictions being put on Russia due to their own interests with needing to import a lot of Russian oil. So like they were uncertain about whether they should close down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline as a way to put sanctions on Russia. So how is Germany's own interests impacting its ability to deal with the Russian-Ukraine problem right now?
Thank you. Great question. Well, at the moment, completely reversed, as I mentioned. It's not so much oil we're importing from Russia, but it's gas. And 55%, I think, of our gas supplies come through this Nord Stream 1, the first pipeline that's already been opened a couple of years back. And the Nord Stream 2, the second pipeline, also the Baltic Sea, has just been finalized. So that's also that is a project that was put forward by 4 companies together with Gazprom from Russia 10, 15 years back. There's a French and Austrian German company involved, but certainly it was also a way, if you want, and that's the line before Putin took this decision to just attack Ukraine. It was also always a balancing act, a fine line that Germany had to dance with regard to Russia, because Russia is how after the end of the Soviet Union always something of a wobbling entity. There are some democratic elements there were seemingly, but then now you see that it's transformed itself into an autocratic regime. If you see people protesting in the streets, they are going to be arrested. So it's turned more and more, it's changed more and more, despite also the efforts of to engage it. So this is one let's say pre-Ukraine issue or feature that characterized Germany's foreign policy, is to walk this fine line, to somehow engage Russia, to bring it closer to the European markets and to European political issues, but at the same time trying to bring aboard also our partners. So we've become, since 2014, the biggest financial donor to Ukraine. So we've always said this has to be like a balanced package, also modernizing Ukrainian gas installation and pipelines that ran through, because Ukraine before was the main transit for Russian gas. Having said that, there's another aspect to German policy, and that is the Second World War and the catastrophe of the Shoah, but especially the war. So you had the brutal attack by the Nazi regime, or Nazi Germany rather, you had 8 million people in Ukraine killed through that attack, but you also had 20 million Soviet Russian people killed. So you always, before this big turnaround now, the decision taken by the German government to take a decisive stance, you always had to weigh that also in. Should German weapons again kill Russian soldiers given to Ukrainian soldiers? That was the consideration before we now took this dramatic turn in our foreign policy. And now, as you mentioned rightly in your question, now, of course, Germany will pay probably the highest price when it comes to cost and energy. The Russians might now shut off Nord Stream 1. So the German government has also looked has to look into its energy supplies and restructure and minimize our dependence on just one big supplier of energy. And of course, the costs will be rising. And I'm pretty sure that Germany, like in the Yugoslav crisis, will also take in the highest number of refugees. We will see that subsequently, I think, in the next weeks to come.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hello. So first things first, my question kind of veers a bit more into domestic policy. Is it okay for me to ask that? Would you like me to? Okay.
Sure. Oh, anything.
So a lot big talking point we've been hearing in the United States is that Germany is extremely dependent on Russian natural gas, as you yourself has said. So, but less than a decade ago, Germany closed down all of its nuclear power stations. Was that a mistake in the moved away from natural gas and other fossil fuels?
That's a great question. We took the decision to close them down when the catastrophe of Fukushima occurred. Our then Chancellor Angela Merkel said, now we have to get out of nuclear, which was kind of a solitary decision also because most of our European partners have not gone down the same path. And since then, we are trying to stage this kind of big energy transformation, turning to renewables. Germany stands at 40% of renewables in their energy mix, which is good, but it's not. We're still quite far away from the aims that we've and the goals we've set for ourselves. And I think the last COP, the climate change conference, has also shown that there's a long way to 2040 and many things to do before we can claim we have become a CO2 neutral country. At the moment there's an acute debate going on in Germany because this is the year 2022 when the last 3 nuclear power plants in Germany are to be shut down. And as far as the companies that are dealing with this are concerned, they are saying, well, it's irreversible because now the nuclear material has to cool down, and it's a process that is almost irreversible. But of course, with this very, very recent decision, also by our new minister for economic affairs from the Green Party, there's of course this question has sprung up: should we maybe continue to have these power plants working, and should we maybe prolong also the energy supply by coal, which of course is in terms of our climate ambitions would be a reversal. So this is currently going on, and I can't even tell you how this is going to play out in the next days and weeks to come. Our Minister of Economic Affairs from the Green Party, I mean, of all parties, is currently visiting Washington. I think they're discussing also these issues of energy supply. But he's been very, very straightforward and forthcoming in saying, well, we have to restructure completely our energy mix and energy market to become less dependent. He's also announced that now, and I think former President Trump would join us in rejoicing that Germany is now quickly building 2 terminals on the North Sea coast in Wilhelmshaven and Brunsbüttel on the Elbe River for liquid natural gas, which the US has always offered to ship to Europe. So there's a lot going on, a lot of money that has to be spent on top of all the extra spending that occurred through the pandemic, and we're still not out of it. So Germany has decided to set aside an extra fund of several hundred billion euros to speed up this energy transition or transformation, but at the same time also to raise our defense expenditure significantly. So a lot to discuss, and your question is really right at the center of the debate going on right now in Germany.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, first off. And so while the physical separation of West and East Germany may be gone, do you find that even today there may still be differences, whether they're cultural, economic, etc., between those two areas of Germany?
It's another great question. Yes, I think I do think that, and I think it's a natural course of time that it's taken since the reunification, and economic difference still exists. So the wage level is not standing at not even at 90% when it comes to compare Western and Eastern wages. There's also been quite an exodus of young East Germans that have come to study and to work either in Western Germany or other countries, neighboring countries, Austria or other places. And there's, of course, a big generational split. So the older generation that had led a different life, many of whom may be in also political positions and with some, I don't know, personal clout attached to it, had to, of course, were most of them relegated to the sidelines, had to look for new jobs towards the end of their working life. And there's a term that was dubbed for some years now, it's subsiding a little bit, which is Ostalgia, Ost meaning East. So older generation, people from the older generation longing for what they seemingly have lost their position and their recognition at the time when they lived in the GDR. But I think overall there's none whatsoever indication that East Germans would like to go back to the times before the fall of the wall. Of course, no one would forgo their rights, all the rights that came with the end of that oppressive regime, traveling freely, deciding for your own life. And I think the young people in East Germany, they certainly are very much in their thinking as the youngsters in West Germany. So that is slowly adapting, but certainly as 40 years and before that, during the Nazi era, certain regions have been neglected or run down also through the communist era. There's still a lot of catching up to do in Saxony and in other parts of the East, where where prosperity or job perspectives aren't as they are in the West. So there's still a lot of catching up to do. On the other hand, the direct investments and what companies build up, of course, in the East is state of the art. That's the advantage when you start from scratch. That sometimes what you then get is the newest, the most modern version you can get, and that is also something that some Western partners have deplored, how Japan and Germany, after losing World War II, have come to flourish economically again, also because sometimes they started from scratch. So that is also where you have in some parts of the Eastern Länder, in East Germany, you have the most modern manufacturing sites. Tesla, Elon Musk has just started building his factory south of Berlin. So there are many islands sprouting up, but there's also with regard to some worldviews, there remain also gaps. So when it comes to migration, for instance, and to foreigners, as there has been, especially in the easternmost parts of East Germany, has been less presence of foreigners. And there's also this in some political quarters, right-wing quarters, this idea that Europe and Germany is overrun by foreigners, by migrants. And you've seen that probably in 2015, when Angela Merkel opened the gates to the Syrian refugees, there's been a lot of backlash in that part of our country, but that has also subsided. But differences still exist. Yes, they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for your time today. Even though you weren't able to be here in person, your experiences are still very impactful and are what make WorldQuest truly as special as it is. So thank you for being able to be here today.
Vielen Dank.
Hopefully a bit of an easier question. What are some of the cultural things from Germany that you hope that German-based societies like Montana are able to adapt?
That would probably need more of an insight, and I would have loved to gain that in my being able to come to Montana in person. But certainly, Germany is the German society of these days is a society that has, and then again, maybe that is completely apart from your reality in Montana, that has changed to be an open, welcoming society over the decades. So my mother was Italian. When she came in the late 50s, there was little foreign presence. Nowadays, German cities have become very multiculti, as we say in German, multicultural, with a lot of different food and presences, very much like I see here in California, but I'm sure the same holds true for Missoula and Bozeman and Helena and other places in your wonderful state. So that is something as a big change that I see in my country. Climate change is very important and very dear to Germans, and there's a lot of daily routines that have changed over the past decades in Germany when it comes to separate and recycle garbage and to also enlarge the area of our national parks. So that is something that is that also has led to the decision after Fukushima to abandon nuclear. So maybe that is something that is quite typical for Germans. And one other thing I could mention, but again, this is a systemic difference to the US, is that our universities in Germany are almost all of them are free. So you just there's a number of private universities, but most of them are free for students, which gives you a great choice and range of choices you can make. Plus, we have this, you might have heard, this dual approach when it comes to apprenticeships. So we have this long established, for centuries established system in Germany and Austria and Switzerland also, that after you finish high school, you can either decide to go to university to study and do your masters or your BAs, or you learn a job, you go to a professional school, and you kind of divide your working time working in a company, but let's say for 5-6 weeks, and then do another 5-6 weeks at the professional school, and you come out of it with a proper degree, with a Meister degree, which then gives you a good chance to open your company of your own, and it's a great incentive for many. And as we've seen, and maybe this is a process similar to the US also, more and more of the high school students that finish their high school go and study at universities, and less decide to go for the dual system, which of course depletes a bit the base for some of the job fields or working fields that you have. But on the other hand, it's a great chance should you decide to do that. And it's a highly regarded and well-established system that we also try to offer through our network of German schools abroad, like here in the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley School, or other ones in Latin America. So that is something that is maybe different to the US system, but it gets you closer to jobs. And if I may say so, I don't even know what I should recommend to my teenagers, whether they should go to university or go for a job right away, because they're very well paid these days, and people are a bit scarce. But fortunately, we have also our neighboring countries. Many Polish people come and work in that job field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I heard that you worked in London. How did Brexit affect the work you did there, and how does it affect the work that German diplomats do in London now, and more broadly, how has it affected Germany as a whole?
Thank you. Yeah, it was a difficult 4 years, because Brexit, as you might have followed, was and still is a very twisted story with a lot of ups and downs. Towards the end of my stay, I wouldn't have placed a bet on whether I would still see the UK really Brexit, because there have been difficult times on a political in the political field, because Theresa May lost her majority in the House of Commons. But more difficult, I think that when the referendum took place in 2016, the large majority of those that voted to leave, I don't think they really meant to leave the European Union, or the European Union was the major problem per se. It was rather a perception, I think, in many quarters of British society, that they felt overwhelmed by migration, but by changes that are due to globalization. So some of the jobs, some of the regions in the country felt less connected to and with less chances to participate in what makes, let's say, the rich South and Southeast in the UK, and the North getting poorer and poorer. So I think at the bottom of the heart it was not so much an anti-EU decision, but rather many quarters of British society thought they might as well try to get out of the EU, and the EU was, by the Leave campaign, blamed as the source of all the problems. And there were, of course, many lies coming out of that quarter, saying, well, Turkey is about to join, and the United Kingdom might be overflown by migrants from Turkey, and the promise of the 350 million pounds per week go to the National Health Service, which is very dear to our British friends. So that is part of I would call it an irrational decision in the end, because British politics or politicians who favored Brexit hadn't really thought out a way forward. So what should substitute? If you take a certain decision to leave a group of countries, then you should know the way forward. And I think there was little thinking invested in that direction, a little bit toying with the idea of regrouping the Commonwealth states again, but that didn't work very well. And I think certainly through the years of the Trump administration, Britain got a first glance of how uncomfortable it can be if you don't belong, either if you are a really big entity in terms of trade or economic affairs, or you don't belong to a strong group like the EU is, with the biggest single market in the world, 450 million consumers. And all of a sudden, when it came to tariffs on steel and aluminum, and the big row between Boeing and Airbus, Britain somehow felt left out in a way, and they still are tucked between having to redefine their relationship to the European Union, because somehow they have to, and try to find a new footing with the US government in Washington when it comes to finding a free trade agreement, finding their place in different fora like the CPTPP, Trans-Pacific partnerships. It is not easy. Plus, they all have to redo the whole thing that previously the European Union did for them in terms of trade arrangements and trade agreements, and that is, of course, a daunting task. And certainly the European Union's market is the one that third countries look at when they in their dealings with Britain. So I think they have, in many instances, just overlooked and miscalculated the consequences. Many quarters in the British economy have gone down. They've simply lost their customers in the markets on European mainland and can't replace them easily. And becoming a third country is certainly a different world you live in instead of being a member state. But that's what they wanted, and that somehow has some logic to it when you think you are going to be sitting at the table with some sort of association, but you don't really have a say on that. So it was, in a way, it was consequential or logical to say, well, if we want out, really. But it is still an unresolved issue, let alone how to go about the Northern Ireland Protocol, because that kind of Boris Johnson kind of allowed for a tariff border through the Irish Sea. And in the end, it also comes down to standards and regulations. Will you tilt to the US regulatory framework or to the European, or how do you reconcile that? And that's a question still, many questions still wide open. And I think overall the British economy and the British society is losing out on it. And at least the safest assumption is you can say that there's no tangible advantage coming out of that Brexit decision, although certainly the secretaries, the ministers, departments would claim otherwise. But so far, there's only one direction that is going down at the moment, and that is a tragedy a little bit and deplorable, because Britain, as the second largest economy in Europe, and also as a nuclear state, as a militarily important partner, has always been a great partner, a great column when it came to the European system, together with the French. And they are now politically, they are dearly missed. But yeah, for the time being, we are where we are. And maybe in the future, young Britons will once again go to a referendum and decide to reapply, but then probably without having all the rebates and the special conditions that Maggie Thatcher and other British leaders negotiated over the years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So one thing that you often hear when discussing German foreign policy, and something that you briefly touched on, is the way in which Germany, of course, provides huge support for refugees, and also the way in which Germany actively tries to avoid racism or any sort of white supremacy taking root domestically. Regarding this, I was curious what the German perspective is on the current Uyghur crisis in China, and if Germany plans to take any action, and if so, how?
Yeah. That's a great question. That is another, I think, fundamental front line we are faced in foreign policy issues now. The systemic confrontation with partners or countries like Russia, now brazenly opting for the military solutions, but China, on the other hand, as well, being such an important market. And such an important creditor in the world, and such an important economic actor as well. Also in the field of energy supply, where the Chinese are working globally to make sure that their economy has enough supplies and energy assured. So that is certainly the next, if not even more important question, how to go about China. And we've seen in the past years the German position move when it came to go about China and their political issues in the fields of human rights. Now Taiwan comes more and more to the forefront, with China taking a more assertive and more aggressive posture vis-a-vis the so-called province of Taiwan. And certainly the German position has also moved when it came to the genocide of the Uyghur minority in the Islamic part of China. And I've seen in the past 2 years a number of laws that were passed in Germany to have a closer look at our supply chains, pretty much on the lines like the British were doing, also to make sure that either some of the supply chains that went into China to the Uyghur province were closely monitored or cut off altogether. And I think this stance has a bit similar to Russia also been a more severe one more and more over the years. The same is also, you could also argue, in the field of the Huawei 5G political issue, where in the beginning, I think our Chancellor Merkel was trying to take an equidistant stance to have some elements maybe of Huawei removed, but other ones, because there was so many heavy investments had taken place, to leave them in the system. But with this more, how to say, more hostile approach or more hardened approach that China is taking, the political thinking in Germany has also changed. Angela Merkel had tried again to have diplomacy in negotiations prevail when she agreed with the Chinese leadership as the EU Council presidency in 2020 to sign off a framework, a ground framework in the dealings of the EU with China, but that hasn't gone very far over the past 2 years. Of course, one reason being the pandemic, but also the hardened position and the more and more assertive stance that China is taking, and also the refusal of the Chinese side to open up economically and also in terms of communication and human rights vis-a-vis their own population. So I see another confrontation line there, and another big challenge for German foreign policy, which is taking also with regard to China a more assertive stance. And the EU, Brussels, the Commission has also went also down that path. So that's another maybe the even more decisive, because China is so important in all of our lives. The more important question and challenge to tackle in the next coming years.
Thank you so much for your perspective.
Thank you.
Also, this is going to be the last question before we go to the student-to-student global conversation.
Hi, thank you for being here. As I'm from the Netherlands, I've noticed a lot of friends and family being afraid of what's going on in Europe right now. How would you say the common people in Germany are reacting to it?
You mean in terms of the war going on?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's need to worry. I think the warfare will be, as it continues now, and it looks at the moment that Vladimir Putin is trying to make a decisive blow to the government in Kiev, bringing in more forces, maybe also from Belarus, to kind of end this power grab or land grab, if you will, decisively in the next couple days. So that would then be something to be contained on the territory, or something going on in the territory of Ukraine. So I wouldn't say in terms of security there's a high risk of a spillover, let's say NATO troops going onto Ukrainian soil, or a spillover or Russian attack or Belarus attack on European Union's or NATO soil. I don't think that. I don't see that also with regard to the more vulnerable Baltic states that are NATO members, because I think that would be a step too far that even Putin wouldn't try to do. He's of course threatened in the past days that he's set his special weaponry, including nuclear devices, in ready alert. But then experts say they are always in an alert stage. So I think this is more of a coercion, act of coercion, and psychological threat to intimidate some quarters of this of the Western alliance that I don't think will work. So at the moment, I think there's no big risk. I know there's talk about a potential third world war, but I question Vladimir Putin's abilities to fully oversee the consequences of what he's doing in Ukraine, but I don't question so far his sanity when it comes to using nuclear weaponry and the risk associated with that, to have an all-out war in Europe that I don't see, or I don't want to see. I don't wish that. But at the time being, for the time being, I don't think it is risky to travel to Europe.
Okay, thank you.
Let alone the Netherlands.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dankeschön.
I would like to thank Consul General Oliver Schramm, sending my best wishes to the consulate in San Francisco. For the next part of the program.
Yep. And we're going to say goodbye to
yes, well,
Consul General.
that was
Thank
just
you
my
so
thing
much.
for the next part. Please say goodbye.
For the quest.